In the wake of everything that happened in Volume 8, there is going to be a ton of people struggling to make it from one day to the next. All of the people in Atlas who lost loved ones, their livelihood, the place that they had known their entire lives, completely uprooted in a matter of a couple days, and having to move to a completely unknown desert environment in Vacuo. All of the people in Vacuo now having to readjust to the entire population of another continent being dropped at their doorstep, with all of the negativity that they bring with them, the grim attacks that will follow, and also the strain that it will put on Vacuo's economy. What we learned from After the Fall and Before the Dawn, well, in Vacuo, it's not like they were the most prosperous of kingdoms to begin with. There were still people struggling for food and other resources, and now with so many more mouths to feed and people to shelter, that's only going to strain everything that much more. Not to mention that everyone else on Remnant, along with the people of Atlas and Vacuo, now know of Salem's existence, and they will be living in constant fear of when their time will come, when Salem will send the Grim after them as well, knowing that 3 out of the 4 Huntsman Academies, along with an entire kingdom, has been taken out by Salem, and that kingdom being the one that possessed the greatest military power on all of Remnant, well, that's not really going to invite many cheery thoughts. So everyone on Remnant is going to be feeling some despair after the events of Volume 8, but near the top of that list is very likely Qrow, because after the events of Volume 8, he is going to be plunged into probably the darkest despair that he will ever experience in his entire life. We saw how far Qrow had fallen in Volume 6, after finding out Ozpin had lied to him, that Salem was immortal, and this entire goal that he had pretty much devoted his entire life to, all of a sudden seemed meaningless. He started drinking himself into oblivion, and was going to let himself go, if not for RWBY. His niece pulled him out of that, was able to get him back up on his feet, and that became his new purpose. He decided to follow RWBY, to support her, and ultimately I think his new life's purpose became to protect his nieces, both RWBY and Yang, along with their friends. And then after arriving in Atlas, he met other people that kind of reinforced that viewpoint, I believe. When Clover talked to Qrow and said that, well, Qrow does a lot more for RWBY and Yang than he really gives himself credit for. Robin also reinforces this with Qrow, that he is the better huntsman than Clover. All of these different things have sort of boosted Qrow's own self-worth that he felt he lost back in Volume 6. But now, at the end of Volume 8, he's lost everything once again, and is left in a much worse place than what he was in Volume 6. Now, we don't know exactly how Qrow reacted when he lost Summer Rose, when Summer disappeared from Team Stark, and Qrow, admittedly, doesn't really know what happened to her. But presumably, she was either killed or captured or something by Salem, so much so that she's never going to return. We don't know how badly that affected Qrow at that time, but this, I feel, is going to be even more so. RWBY and Yang had became his reason for living, in my opinion, and at the end of Volume 8, he lost them. The last time we see Qrow in Volume 8 is when he's flying in an Atlesian ship over top of Atlas as it crashes to the ground, and then a flood of water overtakes the entirety of the city. Qrow and Robin were privy to the entire plan that was going on. Weiss communicated it to Winter, and they were all on board. So, presumably, Qrow knew that everyone was supposed to escape using the Relic of Creation to get to another realm, and eventually everyone would get to Vacuo. But when that massive amount of water flooded the remains of Atlas, Qrow realized that something did not go according to plan. Everyone knew that Atlas would fall, but the massive influx of this water meant that likely someone else got the Relic of Creation, and we see him calling out for RWBY and Yang. He's terrified that they didn't make it. So with this thought in mind, and very likely a massive knot in the pit of his stomach, he is going to be pushing to make his way to Vacuo. Likely, Robin and the remaining Aesops are going to go along with that. They want to, well, Robin wants to reconnect with the Happy Huntresses, and the Aesops probably want to protect their people as well, the people of Atlas. So they're going to make their way directly to Vacuo and find out the truth. Along the way, they might actually pick up Maria and Pietro, as they were still on Amity Arena when it fell, and I really doubt that Maria and Pietro would have died from that crash, because there were still 3 of the gravity dust stabilizers on Amity Coliseum, so they probably just crashed somewhere out in well, the vast expanse of Atlas, which is admittedly pretty cold, though both of them have aura, though Pietro's isn't exactly complete aura, so presumably they have survived, and Qrow and the Aesops will pick them up along the way. We'll see them again in Vacuo. That's my best guess, because I really hope that Pietro and Maria aren't just off-screened like that. But upon arriving in Vacuo, Qrow will see that RWBY and Yang did not make it. The two people that he was meant to protect. If Qrow is indeed RWBY's father, as myself and many others believe is very likely, that he and Summer ended up having RWBY, then this is going to hit him unbelievably hard. After losing Summer, after losing his life's purpose that he thought he had with Ozpin to protect the entire world, which would include RWBY, well, he then devoted himself, after losing Ozpin, to protecting RWBY individually. In Volume 4, we see that he shadowed Team Ranger, that he was protecting them from Grimm for months on end, and then when joining up with them, he kind of became their protector, their leader of sorts. When he fell off the wagon, then RWBY was the one who picked him up, and he still continued to support them. Throughout all of this, I'm sure he saw himself as RWBY's protector to some degree. Yes, she's a huntress and doesn't necessarily need protecting, but Qrow wanted to do whatever he could to protect her. And under his watch, she died. That is going to plunge him into the deepest despair that he will ever experience. And if he didn't have people alongside him, in this case Robin, to help bring him out of that, and when he gets to Vacuo, he will also have Professor Theodore and maybe some other huntsmen or huntresses that he knew in Vacuo to help support him and prevent him from spiraling completely out of control. Because if he didn't have anyone, I honestly don't know if he would be able to last, because he's been through so much throughout the course of RWBY, and I can't even imagine what it feels like to have gone through what he went through up until this point, but what it will feel like when he finds out that RWBY and Yang did not make it. He is going to be in so much pain from the guilt and the despair of losing RWBY and Yang, but hopefully the people around him will be able to keep him standing. I don't think that guilt, that despair will ever go away. That feeling that he has, even when Team RWBY and everyone does return from this other realm and they make it back and Qrow sees that RWBY and Yang are still alive. It's going to be a very emotional reunion, don't get me wrong, but that feeling of loss is still going to stick with him. And if Qrow is able to keep going in RWBY and Yang's absence, possibly even with the help of Ozpin, now that Oscar and Ozpin have reached an understanding, they're still, going to be helping with Professor Theodore and Qrow, they're likely going to re-devote themselves to the fight against Salem, which is what RWBY and Yang were fighting for as well. Not to mention, this is pretty much their last chance. Salem has essentially crippled 3 out of the 4 kingdoms, at least the fighting forces of those kingdoms, and Vacuo is pretty much the last stronghold. So they know Salem's coming for them, whether they're going to fight back or not. It's whether they just roll over and take it, or are going to actually make a stand. And I think it's pretty much guaranteed that they are going to make a stand, but it is going to be hard for Qrow to cope with that loss, and I don't think he will ever be able to fully cope with it. But if he is able to stay standing, it will likely be due to the people that are around him now, as well as his former teammates. Raven and Ty. At any point, really, after Volume 8 ended, while Qrow is still on that ship, calling out for RWBY and Yang, still the panic, not knowing whether RWBY and Yang made it through, Raven and Ty could show up really at any moment. Because of Raven and her semblance of kindred link, we know that people that she has a strong emotional connection to, she can create portals to. And because of the way that her semblance works, I'm guessing she would know if those connections were to, say, disappear entirely. Like if Yang was no longer existing on Remnant and Raven no longer had that connection, I'm pretty sure that she would be able to sense that connection disappearing. And so, knowing that something happened to Yang, she might go directly to Qrow and ask him what the hell happened, to find out for herself before going to Ty. Or she might go to Ty first and tell him that her link with Yang disappeared. Something must have happened. We know for sure that Ty saw the message that RWBY put out, that Atlas was in trouble, that Salem existed. Everyone knows now things that, well, Ty, Raven, and the rest of Team Stark probably knew from the beginning. But it's also likely that Raven saw that message as well. Now having her connection to Yang disappear entirely, I feel it's more likely that Raven would go to Tai first, tell him that that happened, that probably both of them need to rejoin the fight because Salem's coming for them anyways, and then they would both go to Qrow. This could happen before Qrow even gets to Vacuo, and Qrow could find out that RWBY and Yang didn't make it to Vacuo, not from Winter or anyone in Vacuo, but from his old teammates, Raven and Tai. This would make for a very solemn reunion of Team Stark, and definitely not the reunion that I'm sure a lot of us were hoping for. A badass reunion of Team Stark, either at Beacon or at Vacuo, where they would take to the fight. We would see more of their interactions, how they would fight together, etc. But this reunion is very likely not going to happen that way at the very beginning. All three of them are probably going to come together and mourn the loss of RWBY and Yang together, as well as having that emotional reunion with them when RWBY and Yang finally emerge from this other realm. But ultimately, the point I wanted to make with this video is that Qrow is in for a very rough volume, finding out that RWBY and Yang did not make it, and are presumed to be dead. No one knows what happens when you fall into that void, and I doubt anyone's going to be as optimistic to think that, oh no, they were probably just, transported to another world. I'm sure that they'll be able to come out of it somehow. No. I don't think anyone's going to be that optimistic. Everyone who has fallen is going to be presumed dead, and that is going to devastate Qrow. Every volume of the RWBY series has piled more and more onto Qrow. As I've said in multiple videos, the one thing that I want by the end of the series is for Qrow to have some happiness. He will have Robin there supporting him, as well as Theodore and other people that he might know. And very likely, it's Volume 9 or the beginning of Volume 10 that we are going to see the reunion of Team Stark. Qrow, Tai, and Raven are going to come together to essentially mourn the loss of their children. As morbid as that is, that seems very likely. As even if Raven can't sense whether one of her kindred links is gone or not, I think it's very likely that she can, but if she can't, Qrow is probably going to want to find her and tell her that RWBY and Yang did not make it. At the very least, he'll want to tell Tai. His relationship with Raven isn't exactly, functional, if that's the proper word for it, as Qrow, when Raven took the side of Cinder and everyone else, Qrow said, well, you're just not my sister anymore. I thought I knew you somewhat, but apparently not, and he pretty much just disowned her at that point as being a relative of his. So Qrow may not go to tell Raven, but he would certainly want to tell Tai, RWBY and Yang's father, about everything that happened, and Raven might show up at that time, but ultimately, Qrow is going to need people to support him through this. Likely Team Stark, Robin, Theodore, other people, and we will see a Team Stark reunion. It won't be the reunion that many of us were hoping for, but we will very likely see more of all of these characters. Volume 9 in and of itself likely isn't going to be as action-packed as Volume 7 and 8 have been. It's going to be very much focused on the emotional turmoil that a lot of these characters are going through. Everyone that has suffered and lost in Volume 8. And the people who were transported to this other realm are no different. They lost a lot in that volume as well. And we are going to see how that progresses into the future. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. How do you think Qrow will fare in Volume 9? How far do you think he will fall? And do you think the people around him will be able to support him enough so that he won't spiral out of control? I really think that the writers will not have him fall back into alcoholism, that his connection that he gained with Clover throughout the events of Volume 7, as well as the connection he now has with Robin and the other support that he has, will keep him from falling back on that. That Clover really did have an impact on Qrow's life, and the fact that he is carrying Clover's pin with him, maybe Qrow will still have some faith that RWBY and Yang will come out of it. I'm not exactly sure, but I would love to hear what you guys all think. This was a bit of a more solemn and sad video, especially for the first one that I've filmed in almost 2 months now, but I felt it was a topic that needed to be discussed because it's something that is going to be very present in Volume 9. and it's something that we will definitely have to delve deeper into with a number of other characters that we will expect to see in Volume 9 as well. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did want to see more videos like this one, more RWBY theories, RWBY analyses, etc., make sure to subscribe and join the Guild of the Eternal Flame. Many more videos are going to be coming, even though there haven't been that many posted in recent months. I assure you they certainly are. But with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.